I imagine that many of you that watch this show on YouTube and listen to it on whichever podcast app you prefer also watch and listen to The Hawk's Nest with Brandon Cain. And you should. One of the really outstanding Seahawks shows out there. Well, Brandon is joining me on the show today, so you get the best of both worlds. And we get into some cool stuff. Brandon does some tape breakdowns and X&O evaluations. We're going to talk a lot about the defensive front, some of the news that's happened there this week with personnel, some of the things he's seen from Bobby Wagner in his return to Seattle. We'll talk about some of the more newsy items on the roster, the running back room, his concerns there. And of course, we'll talk about that outstanding young secondary and what he sees from the Seahawks young guns there. Brandon Cain of the Hawk's Nest joins me on this edition of Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Been promising you for a little bit, and he is here with us today, host of the fantastic Hawk's Nest podcast. Brandon Cain is joining the show. Brandon, thanks for taking the time and getting together with me on this today.
Thank you for having me in your house here, man. I appreciate jumping in and chopping it up a bit. So appreciate the extension of the invite.
It's nice this time of year, right? We get stuff to talk about. We get new, fresh stuff to talk about after having to be really creative for a couple of months. The first 5 days of training camp are in the bag. Let's just start with the wide angle view. What are your kind of overall general impressions based on what you've seen and heard so far?
Well, you like me have been through a few decades of watching this team. And I don't know if I can remember, I was thinking about this, contemplating it last night, if I've ever heard of a rookie wide receiver getting the kind of hype and praise that we're hearing from Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think maybe Joey Galloway was my best guess. He was kind of lighting it up early on. He was certainly very impressive. But even DK was not at this level a couple of years ago. He was playing well. He was getting pub. It's not to say that DK just suddenly flashed the first moment he started playing, but this kid is lighting it up almost on a daily basis. There's a new clip coming out, and I'm not usually one to start talking about rookie wide receivers that are due to be our slot receivers, but I mean, the guy is being very impressive across the board in a way where I'm not a guy who likes to throw around words special when we haven't seen him in practice and in pads or playing games. We'll see where it goes when it gets to that, but that part stood out to me, is that just over and over you're hearing that. Obviously, we're also rookie-wise, Kenny McIntosh, with some of those cuts you're seeing with him, and what he's doing is being tremendously impressive on some of those cuts. I mean, those are legit, great vision, presses the hole. That they're showing a little bit of an acumen there. That's not just a rookie I run real fast. I just won't go fast. Ricky Bobby in it. He ain't doing that. And then, of course, we've got the beast mode curse, as I've dubbed it, that's live and well right now going on in training camp with our top two running backs, our prized 2 second-rounders in back-to-back years, sitting on the sidelines, one with a shoulder injury that sounds ever increasingly more grave a little bit, especially listening to Coach Carroll talk about it. Defensively, the defense in its opportunistic ways stands out to me early on. I think that there's a kind of a combination here of a little bit. I was referencing last time I showed that I think that some of the interceptions, especially coming from a guy like Geno, is him working like a starting pitcher in training camp or in spring training. I'm getting confused on sports, but they do this in spring training where these guys will work on a curveball, or I got to work on this third pitch, and they're going to try to lean on it too much in the games or in practices where your interception doesn't really matter. It's him trying to make work, but it's also, I think, notable that you have him on these kind of 7-on-7 drills or in moments here where they're not in pads. It's usually to the advantage of the offense. And I think that the defense getting these interceptions and picks, not even with Tariq Woolen on the football field, is also kind of a carryover from what we saw last year from the defense, and that they had some things that we're not good at. Yeah. But one of the things that they did really well was being opportunistic and getting those turnovers. So that stood out. Michael Jackson too. And I think that this has been a hotly, I don't know if debated item in your kind of community. It's been in mine with, he can't be getting better. He can't have improved. He can't still be now reaching into his prime. It's that Devin Witherspoon's got to be kind of sucking for if he's not able to overtake Mike Jackson. So those have been kind of at the forefront, the early things that, have stood out. Of course, today, once we get to the padded practices and this starts popping, then we'll get a little bit more from the trenches.
Yeah. You touched on it yesterday. 7-on-7 sounded really, really entertaining. A lot of back and forth. No one really coming out on top. And Geno throwing what was reported to be 3 picks, but also throwing some beautiful touchdowns. The one toe tapper to Jackson Smith and Jigba that is one of the clips I'm sure you're referencing. And then digging in a little bit, had a conversation with some people who were at the workout yesterday. One of those Geno picks was a tip ball. One was a ball that should have been caught. But also just some nice plays by the defense. And I look at it, and I saw it on Twitter, and I'm sure you did too. Immediately there's still, Geno has still some doubters that, are we concerned about the turnovers again? And, but we don't know the context. We don't know, is he taking more chances in practice, trying to make some plays happen, knowing that they don't count, right? Or is the defense getting better? It's probably a good thing, isn't it, that it does go back and forth, that one unit isn't dominating the other?
We've had it in recent years where that has been the case, by the way, in seasons where then that showed itself come the regular season, where one side of the ball was handling business, the other side of the ball, it's like, well, it's a little rough right now. Pass rushers aren't winning against the offensive linemen, any one-on-ones. It's defense ain't doing a whole lot. And so it's good they are both going back forth. To your point on that as well, I believe that a lot of these things, interceptions, came down when they were in the red zone. And a big thing that you've probably heard, and I've heard about, spoken by many Seahawks fans over and over again, is that DK's got to get more effective down by the red zone. Geno's got to get more effective in using, he's a big body. You got to Calvin Johnson that stuff down there. Calvin him. And so I think what they were kind of doing, it sounded like a little bit of, let's get better between me and you, DK and Geno, on our chemistry down here and try to tighten this up. And the only way to do that is to get better at it, is to have a guy that's actually covering there and truly cover, not that you're throwing to space on a lob ball that you throw 20 times over and you're like, oh, we got it. You got to do it with the guy pressing up on DK, working off the physicality, understanding the timing, then to Geno for the back corner throw at that point. How much arc do I need to put onto it? This was, a thing that they used to go back and forth with Russell and Carroll. A notable story, I remember Brandon Marshall talking about how there was at one point kind of a tete-a-tete between them regarding how to throw the fade ball in the end zone. So it seems like a straightforward throw, but there's a little bit of nuance there with it. And if you can know that, look, I can throw this pick and coach is not going to jump down my throat, because he knows I'm settled here. He knows I'm going to protect the ball when we get to the games. And he also understands what I'm trying to do, which is work on something that was a deficiency for us last year. We weren't very good in red zone. We need to improve in that. This is the way to kind of do that. That's where not all the picks, but I think that's where a lot of this is really more coming from, rather than it's Geno being wild and free with the ball. And look, Geno back to his old ways,
Yeah, well, and I'd rather a guy in a practice setting, take some chances and see what he can get away with. That I always, when I think about Geno and what he did last year, I keep thinking back to the winning throw to DK at the end of the Rams game down at SoFi Stadium. And that's a throw that if you're being cautious, you're not even attempting. You're not, It's a tight window against Jalen Ramsey in a tough situation. So, I love the baseball analogy. We'll see it sometimes, and Emerson Hancock gives up 9 runs, and then you find out afterwards that it's, he was throwing nothing but 2 seamers or whatever. I like hearing, I guess if I had to lean one way or the other, I like hearing that the defense is making plays. You mentioned it right off the top, and let's talk about it first, because it's the most newsworthy thing, I think, to come out of yesterday's workout when Pete Carroll spoke after practice. It's the running back situation. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were feeling as good as anyone in the league, because while everyone else is dealing with salary issues and cut issues and veterans threatening to hold out, we've got a stacked young running back room because they've devoted those kind of draft assets to it over the last couple of years. And then we show up to training camp. Kenneth Walker isn't running. Zach Charbonnet is not in pads. And we didn't hear until yesterday why. Walker doesn't sound like a big deal. They're just being cautious. Don't want to mess around with the groin. But as positive and optimistic as Pete can be, to a fault sometimes when talking about injuries, it sounded ominous with that. They don't know what's going on with the shoulder. It wasn't through contact. It wasn't through working out. It just kind of came up. Does that one concern you in the running back room as a whole? How much sleep are you losing over this?
Well, and you mentioned it, Dan, you have the same probably feeling I do. If you have a coach, we have a unique situation with having a general manager and coach here this many years on so many levels as far as perception goes, because you do start to learn them. It is, hello, old friend. I know that face. I know what you're thinking. And even as they're very good poker players, and that they're not guys that wear their heart on the sleeve and exactly what they're always thinking, they're great about keeping things under wraps. But you're right. When it comes to Pete and injuries, he is a guy that is optimistic. The glass is not half full. It's 3/4 full. In fact, it's just about overflowing. It just hasn't quite happened yet. So when he does start to speak about those injuries being like that, where it's, the face goes a little gray, gets the long face, and you go, I don't know. We'll check it. We'll check it out. We're checking it out. We're checking it out. Oh, that's akin to, dear God, they might have to remove his arm. That's where we're at right now. So yeah, it's tough. It's one of the things that I try to do, and I look at this from an analyst perspective, is always be evolving a little bit. You go to me 10 years ago, and I certainly would have been probably one of those people that said on the new age analytical front, oh no, just get your stack up of your 6th, 7th rounders and you'll be fine with it. I have found myself shifting in this different direction of this. I think you do have to try to go for a little more quality. I don't want to necessarily pay guys, but I do like the approach they've taken, getting these guys in the second round. I do like the approach of building up the deep backfield, because they're also recognizing, damn, since 2015, I joke that it's the beast mode curse, but it literally is. Every single year, I'm not talking 1, I'm not talking 2, I'm not talking 3, I'm talking all 4 of your guys wrecked to the point that you got to go onto the streets and pull some guy off the streets from his normal job to tote the rock that next Sunday. Yeah. And they've taken lengths to try to fix it. It's not the front office's fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just snake bit stuff is where I look at it with it. So I'm worried. And I think he will come back from the groin, Walker. You're right. That one, you got to just rest it, and you got to let it get 100% because it can rebite. You get it to that 97%, that 3% left can make it rebite if they cut weird or wrong. It's got to go it's like a hammy, got to go all the way with it. But the shoulder ones, yeah, I'm getting worried on that.
It'll be interesting to see how they handle the running back position Friday at the mock game. Does McIntosh get a bunch of touches to get him ready, or now do they take it easy with him because they don't want to lose a third guy? They don't want DJ Dallas to be their number 1 back come opening week. Can't wait to see.
I would be with him. I wouldn't. There's really, you can't have another guy at this point going down with it. You need to, deal with the situation for what it is.
Nick Ballore time.
Nick Ballore, let's go. Full back dives all day.
Let's talk about defense, because this is something that you have taken some deep dives into over the offseason. Some of your film breakdowns are outstanding, and we're going to get into some details about some personnel there. But the biggest news also this week, I think it was Wednesday, the first workout, where Pete just dropped a bomb on us at the end of practice that, oh, by the way, Jarran Reed's playing nose tackle now. Playing it full time. We're depending on him, and we're quote unquote building it around him. And there was even a follow-up question. Did you just say Jarran Reed's playing nose tackle? And Pete said, yeah, that's what I said. Your thoughts on that specifically, his fit there, and also what it says about that lineup?
I think that what they're doing with Jarran Reed is he's going back to the origins of what he was as a player. And what I mean by that is when he was coming out of Alabama, he was a pure one tech coming out of Alabama. He was a guy that was going to be taken on double team blocks on the line of scrimmage, holding the line. You couldn't push him anywhere, strong as an ox. And then he could give you a little bit tinge of pass rush from Alabama at that time. Wasn't known for just a titch. But you even go back and look at it, for instance, his PFF grades back at Alabama at that time. His run defense grades were outstanding. His pass rush, not as much. And so he comes to Seattle.
Second round. Yeah.
That's why he fell in the second round. Exactly. And so he comes to Seattle, and Seattle's got a big hole at 3 tech. Michael Bennett's on his way out, right? Or just left. I can't remember right about that time. And so you had nobody there of 3 tech. And so the coaching staff got creative, and they're like, man, this guy kind of gives us some juice when we kick him over to the 3. He can kind of work over there a little bit. Why? We've got Poona Ford already here now. We've got some big dogs down here already on the 1 tech. We don't really need to make that redundant. And so what happened from that is that Jarran Reed then leaned into that a little bit. And so I've seen this now at times with some interior pass rushers in the league as a trend, Dan. And that is a guy like Javon Hargrave is a great example of this, who the Niners signed to a 4-year, $80 million deal this offseason. A guy who starts with the Steelers as a run defender, but then who, once he goes to the Eagles, you can see, even just looking at the PFF grades with him, where he transitions from going, I don't really want to do the run defense stuff anymore. It's getting the sacks that's going to get me paid. That's going to get money in my pocket. Nobody's paying for the run defense. Go ask Snacks Harrison about how much you get paid for being a run defender only. So he leaned into that, and that came at the cost a little bit of his run defense, in my opinion, over the course of his career. Smartly so for Jarran. It's probably made him a lot of money, but it doesn't not mean that he doesn't have those origins that he can fall back into and play back into that role that he played before. Like Carroll said, he is big. He's got the waist, 320, 330 out there. Strong, as I said, as an ox. So he's got all the components to make it work on the inside. He's just going back to what, he was basically at Alabama. We don't have as much of that need anymore for the 3 tech.
So this speaks to, or it might potentially speak to, what they feel like the readiness is of Cam Young to contribute as a rookie. And you did a show a couple of months ago, and you did a film breakdown. You brought up some legitimate concerns you had. You don't hate the pick. You don't hate the player. You see some upside, but you had concerns about his ability to contribute as a rookie. Talk a little bit about your feelings on Cam Young, but also does moving Reed over there now make you feel better about that spot?
Tremendously better. I was trying to definitely with Cameron Young. He's a big guy who's very strong, and there's a lot of people that are very much on board in a way that I kind of wasn't as much. As you said, I didn't hate it, but it's definitely, the film was problematic in a couple of different respects. He's doing a lot of slanting on his film, which makes it hard when you're trying to assess a defensive lineman's responsibility if he's just trying to prove.
John even said that in the evaluation. That was the challenge they had.
Yeah, it is tough. But then there are also those snaps in there where it's not slanting and where you're looking for. And the thing I have is a problem of making the excuse on the slanting front is, and we'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit about this gap and a half scheme. There's times you're going to do what would be like a slant where you're shooting to one gap, one side, maybe not a full slant because you're actually getting a little upfield, but you are shooting to one thing and you need to have a recognition to get back to the backside gap. And so there's so much of him slanting where he's just blindly, running down the line of scrimmage and the ball carrier is going right past his ear hole and he's just not aware of it happening. And then you mix that with a complete lack of pass rush. There are no moves at all from that. So you come back and go, okay, if he's not a pass rusher, I'm okay with that. I don't tend to expect my zero techs to be able to rush the passer anyway. I mean, if they can push the pocket, great. But are you a really upper level run defender then? Are we getting that from you in the fourth round? Can I count on you to be immovable? And there were times with the double team blocks where he was able to be moved off the line of scrimmage. He was not, like I talked about with Jarran Reed, where you'd go watch Alabama tape with Jarran Reed. Nobody's moving him off the line of scrimmage. Nobody, no two blockers anywhere getting him off. He's going to sit right down and hunker down. That's what he's going to do. And I didn't see enough of that on Cameron Young's tape to where it really stood out. That there is power, there is length, he's got the size and all of that you'd like to put together. And so I'll trust in the Seahawks evaluation of it. But I certainly didn't think day one you wanted this guy to be, to your point, your day one starter out there at the zero tech. I didn't think he was going to be ready.
Now, the other kind of collateral damage, if you will, or certainly another unintended or intended effect of moving Reed over to the nose is what it does to the defensive end position in that hybrid 3-4 scheme. So now you take him out of that mix, although in certain situations he could still play there. Does it weaken your depth there to the point that you feel like they're a body or two short? How do you feel about that spot?
I think that it's easier to accommodate finding a 3-4 end at this point than it seems like it may be as easy to accommodate a zero tech. Because there isn't a lot of them out there on the open market. I mean, there's no guys on the streets now you'd go and sign unless you want to consider Akeem Hicks a zero tech, which I don't really consider him that at this point, especially that he's so old. Or Dundamicon too, spent the most of his career as a 3 tech, and he's old as dirt too. And are you going to move him? No. So it's kind of easier to find the 3-4 end. You could go sign to Jadeveon Clowney right now, move him in as a 3-4 end and a 4-eye, and I think he'll be just fine over there if you really wanted to. So you could address that if you need to. Do they need to though, Dan? That's the part where we're going to have to find once they put the pads on with this. Where's Mike Morris at in his development? Yeah. I'm actually a really relatively high guy on Miles Adams. Mm-hmm. I tend to find him to be a guy that is, not a raw, rough guy, but a guy that's improved and who last year was really starting to come along last year. He wasn't really put in there for a lot of snaps because they were committed to the Puna Ford, Quentin Jefferson, Al Woods, Shelby Harris kind of trained. So there was only so many snaps in there for him to get last year. But when he was on the field, I thought he played pretty well. And he might be a guy ready to kind of step forward. And I'm not talking about just be a cog within the rotation. It's about creating rotation here. It was back in the day in 2013. That's what we're trying to do here. It's more than just the starters. So those two guys and where they're at in their development, I think really is what's going to instruct you on whether or not you need to do it. But I like having to go get that rather than the zero tech. And the one other thing I'll say is that remember too, Dan, they love those 2-man fronts last year. So those college 2-man fronts, I hate them for every fiber of my being. But nonetheless, if you're going to run those 2-man fronts, there's less of a necessity to have the ends because then you're putting 2 DL linemen on. You're not even having an end on at the point, because you have your outside linebackers in a wide 9 technique at that point. So, if you're running 30% of your snaps like that, that takes out 30% need of the snaps of having those guys even on the field.
And there's some things we haven't seen yet. Austin Fielu, who Bob Condotta said the staff is pretty high on, the XFL player, former Oregon Duck, has been banged up. He's on the PUP list. We haven't seen him yet. It could open an opportunity for a guy like MJ Anderson, the undrafted free agent out of Iowa State. But
to buy,
would you feel better if they still need to add a body up there?
Yeah. I'm not pressing in it and that this has got to be done ASAP. This is like everyone pull the fire alarms in the building because we need to get them here. Not to that degree, but I think that you do need to, before the trade deadline, if we want to put it out to that far, look to make a move if you want to be a contender.
Would you be pro Shelby Harris coming back?
I'd be okay with it. I honestly would like to see a bit of a bigger swing of a move. I mean, Shelby last year, it was a mixed bag. I mean, he was obviously, I think, our highest rated defensive lineman last season. I don't think he kind of gave you the same kind of pass rush that they got from him in Denver. He was a pretty good run defender, so I'll give him that. He showed up all over the place at times when he's on the field as a run defense. Was a little banged up, getting a little bit older. Part of me kind of was like, is there maybe another kind of bigger move we can make? If somebody's cut at the deadline, this year it's going to be a big wave of cuts from 90 to 55 all at once. Will there be maybe a better guy at that point, or a trade option where you can flip a guy for a 5th rounder, but you're getting a guy you're basically taking on a salary that the team doesn't want to pay because they've had a young guy step forward? I tend to, that's why I like to have the patient approach on this more than the pressing to get the Shelby Harris in the house, because I go, by waiting, you might get the better asset. And it may not cost you a lot. You get the sort of the depressed cost to get that really much more improved asset in the building.
Well, certainly with this new rule cutting all the way from 90 to 53, it creates another wave of free agency. And what I suspect, especially as much as we know about John Schneider and how he likes to operate, is a lot of GMs will be burning up the phone lines in the day or two before the cut down, trying to trade some low draft picks for guys and get them before they're exposed to waivers. So there's going to be players available at that point.
I agree. And I think it's John Schneider's wheelhouse too, because he does with the undrafted free agents, he's talked about it. I like the chaos. I wish the draft was one day, right? He said stuff like that, where he kind of, that's in his mode, where I think other general managers get a little bit probably stressed. I'd be like, I'd want more time. I mean, I like the 3 cut down phases if I'm a general manager, so I can slowly pick through, sift through what I want, and it's going to be, what is it? So we got 45 times 32. 1,500 players.
That's
and 100 players in one day, all on the market.
Waiver wire to sift through.
Woo.
So we just talked about the entire defensive line, and we didn't even talk about the guy who signed the biggest free agent contract as an outside free agent under the Carolyn Schneider regime. There are some people who are concerned that we spent all that money on Draymond Jones, and he is a pass rusher, but weak against the run. Where do you stand on that?
I think the weakness in the run's a little bit overstated. He's not bad. Any kind of time that you have a defense that's dealing with an offense that's the highest ineptitude order for a couple of seasons period, that means you've seen this before, where you have a strong defense and a crappy offense. We've seen it with our Seahawks at times when they've been this way, where the defense is strong through the first 2 quarters, but the offense is 3-and-out city every single time they're on the field. You get halfway into about the 3rd quarter of that stuff going on, and the defense starts to break. And how do they break? It's usually on the back of teams running down their throat at that point, because they're up in the game, because the offense can't score because they're 3-and-out. So I'm not putting all the blame on that, but let's go back and see what do we know about Denver last year, with Russ, that they would have been, I think, through the first 10 games, 9-1 if they had scored 19 points every single game. And so that defense as a whole, I would reckon to guess, Dan, if you looked at all of, let's say, the PFF grades on run defense for that defense all the way down the line last year, it might show porous, but I think the reputation around the league and how they're viewed around the league and their abilities in that respect has looked a little bit better, where teams would account for that. It's like, look, you're putting them out on the field for all of these extra snaps they got to roll because the offense can't keep itself up to snuff. That's going to cause those numbers to go down. Like Uchenna playing too many snaps, like, Pete referenced. Uchenna was like a 71 grade. He would have been a guy higher graded by PFF, more held in higher acclaim, but he got wore down as the year went on because they had to have all those snaps that they gave to him. So he's not great in run, but he's not necessarily bad in run. I like the deal well enough. My only issue with it, Dan, a little bit is that, with the way we play these contract number games, a little bit, it bothers me at times because it's a multitude of 1, 2, 3 year deals. And we end up eating up a lot of our cap very, very quickly. And we're not able to spread this money out. And when I look at the 2 deals between Draymond Jones and Javon Hargrave signs to the Cowboys on a 4-year, $80 million deal, $20 million a year. You have Draymond Jones on a 3-year deal at $17.5 million per year. So you have one guy who's actually making more technically total money. I know NFL contracts are what they are, but here with this deal of Javon Hargrave, this year's cap hit with the Niners, as they're in their Super Bowl window, as they're going for it this year, is $5.5 million. Your cost for Draymond Jones is 10.1, almost double. So you could have almost fit 2 players. And we know this on the back of, they were trying to get that Zach Allen kid who I loved out of the Cardinals, who ended up going to Denver.
Yep, same.
It's like, if you put the extra year on there, if you had squished down the numbers a little more, did you have the offer to make over the top to bring in Zach Allen? And if we're talking about Zach Allen and Draymond Jones as the 2 fixture pieces you brought in this offseason for that defensive line, we feel pretty doggone good about what they did.
It is frustrating as as kind of a geeky type fan, the ones that love to watch, over the cap and spot track and kind of think about 24 and 25 and 26 is 2 years in a row now. The fan base has thought, gosh, I love the draft this year, but also next year we have so much cap space. And then the way that they structure these deals is they use that so that they can, make things happen responsibly this year. For sure. It's before we move off the defensive line, I want to get your thoughts on.
Quick question with you. Do you
Yes.
feel like too that that's a potential situation that, when we talk about down the future with the way the teams and what they're doing now to get to Super Bowls and going this opposite approach, do you have any concern long-term about this team as it reaches into contender status if they're dealing with this, what I would call a disadvantage of being forced from the top down to kind of run these deals out? Because this has been a trend going back to that. Remember that Greg Olsen free agency year where it was Greg Olsen and Ben Mayowa and Bruce Irvin and Jarran Reed on a 1-year deal. And they've been doing it since then, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Where do you stand on that long-term? Do you think they can still work around it because the team will just be so talented and good? Or do you think that could be the thing that's could end up becoming an issue down the line?
It's tough, and I don't mean to take the easy way out, but I kind of sit on the fence, and I'll throw another baseball analogy at you. We've got the trade deadline tomorrow, and the big debate, if you're a Mariner fan, is do they sell, do they buy, or do they kind of do both? And I can see both sides of it. As a fan, would I love it if Jerry Dipoto went out and made a big swing and brought in a big bat, and if it meant giving up a guy like Logan Gilbert that has so much value to us? Sure, if it brought the right guys back in return, but I also kind of want to hang on to that future and not dip into our core too much. I can see what other teams do and some of the swings that they make when it seems like they're being reckless with the salary cap, but yet every year they're able to really add impact that can influence the roster and their ability to win now. But I think we've seen this team. I'll put it this way, I guess. I prefer their current approach to the one that brought us Jamal Adams. I don't want to see those kinds of deals anymore. I just don't want to see those big swing for the fences, mortgage the future, potentially be reckless to bring in one guy that you think can put you over the top, unless the roster is in that spot where they just need one guy and it makes sense at that time. So I tend to favor this approach.
So if you got the Chiefs calling you tomorrow and they say, hey, Dan, hey,
what do we got?
Dan, hey, this Chris Jones thing ain't going nowhere with these negotiations right now.
Okay.
And we need some edge rush help. I want to get a backup for Travis Kelce. He's getting a little bit up there in age. Why don't you throw us Fant and Taylor and kick me in a 1, and we'll throw you Chris Jones.
100%. Yeah. If you're talking an elite, no brainer, no doubt talent that is going to elevate your team and give you a better chance to win a Super Bowl. Yeah, I'm doing that.
Me too. Yeah. So I just wanted to grab that one because I know that's the outlier. I went with the extreme one, brother. I know I did that thing you're not supposed to do, where you take the arguments to the extreme.
But if you want to make it happen, you can do that.
Yeah, and I mean, it would hurt to spend that kind of money, but at the same point in time, it's like that guy in this defense and adding him to this defensive line at this point would be, if I can go find that kind of equivalent move. And I'm with you on that. I don't like the Jamal. I think what stands out to me about making a deal like that and what they've done in recent years with the Jimmy Graham situation was this way as well. You're going to go make a move for a player like that. Jamal's injury situation is hard to see coming, but use them right. Use them in the correct fashion. Put them in the position to succeed. Don't force fit them into your system a little bit like we've done in the past. And that hopefully they've learned their lesson with that. I think they have. They're already if they try to get Jamal back with this defense, you can see the changes to this defense and what it's doing, and having him go back to a little bit of what he did with the Jets, that they're trying to put him into those kind of positions now. But it'd be good to do that from day one. It's like they did the same with Jimmy Graham. It's like inline tight end, inline tight end, inline tight end. Okay, we'll make you our move tight end. It's like, dude, yes. That
gives me PTSD.
I know.
Situations.
Well, and I can understand why I said no more of this. After doing it twice over, where you're just like, dude, this isn't hard. He's a slot receiver. 67% of the time, that's how the Saints are using him. Put him out in the slot.
I think you could see that, lessons learned kind of play into how they approach the draft this year. I think there were opportunities for them to be aggressive and move up or down and do some things, and they just decided to stand pat and stick to their plan. So we'll see.
I think the team did a great job of learning lessons in recent years. Something that they didn't do through kind of the 15 to 20 period. It was
absolutely
we ain't learning jack shit. Dak's not. But now it's like they've started to go, okay, we got to fix these things. It was almost like a course change with the Wilson offseason, where it's like, we're fixing this. We're changing our approach here. It's been very encouraging to see.
Well, and I think maybe the best example of that is what they've done at the edge spot and the outside linebacker spot, because for 3-4 years in a row, like you were talking about, those years that they kept signing, Carlos Dunlap and bringing in Kerry Hyders and bringing back Mayoa and Irvin at an old age coming off an injury, that, you kept hearing Pete in your sleep over and over say, can't have enough edge rushers, can't have enough. Well, they never had enough.
Yeah.
And now they've just devoted so many resources to it that they seem like they're stacked up pretty deep for the next couple of years. So hopefully those lessons will be applied to some other positions too. Let's talk about linebacker. Because I think this was a spot that a lot of fans were concerned going into the year. Love the return of Bobby, but wonder how much he has left in the tank. Devin Bush didn't cost a lot, but some concerns about which player we're getting, right? The one pre-injury that looked so good as a rookie for Pittsburgh, or the one that got benched at the end of the season last year. Hadn't heard much about his performance in camp until he came up with a really nice pick in that 7-on-7 red zone drill yesterday. But what has stood out to me the last couple of days is multiple reporters who cover the Seahawks watching practice talking about how shocked they are at how good Bobby Wagner looks. That he was covering, I think it was DJ Dallas on a wheel route or a slant and go yesterday, and that he looked as fast, if not faster, than he has in years, that he doesn't look anything like a player who's slowing down. Are you buying that?
Yeah, but there's a bias here from my standpoint, because I was never in on the train with anybody this offseason that was, there was a good amount of people out there shading Bobby and the Seahawks fandom as far as where he is as a player. And it's not they weren't being disrespectful, just their honest assessment of where he was as a player at this point. But in my opinion, it was really silly and kind of also easy to then kind of figure out who's watching tape and who's not. I can learn really quickly on sometimes some people's opinion on you ain't checking out any all 22. You're not looking at any of this tape. You've watched the game once in your mind and you don't know, you've not gone and revisited any of it back, because you go back and you look at Bobby Wagner last year with the Rams, and the Rams were putting him in a position to succeed. But there's a reason why he was the highest graded player by PFF last year. And I'm not trying to lean on that as the ultimate end all be all. The eye test also back this up. You got to use them all to me. I'm not just a PFF guy, but it is a tool to use along with your eye test, along with all 22 tape, which will show you the clear view of what's going on, especially when you get that one from the background where you can see exactly what the linebacker's seeing, exactly what he's doing pre-snap, and figure it out. And his instinctiveness was next level. He still didn't show moments where you're seeing him just getting completely, beat by, running backs when on covers like with Dallas. So he's still able to stay. Is he going to be like prime Bobby, where Bobby could cover Randall Cobb 45 yards down the field out of the slot? No, but you're not usually going to ask middle linebackers to do that anyway. So, I'm not the least bit surprised he looks good. He still looked good last year. He's not prime Bobby, but there's a reason he's at that grade. You don't just get handed that grade. People last year were like, well, he was kind of a reputation. Like PFL was just like, well, we're going to give him a legacy grade with Bobby or something.
Yeah, they don't do that.
Then they don't do that. And the tape was impressive with him last year. And the thing that stands out, Dan, for me, that really gave me the confidence with him is I watch other linebackers, and especially when you go from Jordan and Cody Barton to going and watching Bobby 22 tape. You're watching Jordan and Barton deer in the headlights post snap. And a late bounce over to a side as they just still try to read it post snap. Another a beat and a half after the snap has come. Bobby, he's right down there before the snap, and it's going to where the play is going. He is right heads up to where that hole is going, and he's blowing the play up, putting an extra body where the offense is not accounted for there to be an extra body at that point prior to the snap. So he may not have the speed, but the instinctiveness gives him the 2 steps faster, where the Cody Barton and Jordan Brooks are a step slower, despite them being probably technically faster. They're quicker than Bobby at this point because their instincts aren't there. They don't have that necessarily same feel that Bobby does. So only thing I hope, Dan, the one thing I hope though, is that the coaching staff, in the same spirit we talked about with this Jamal Adams situation, looks to put Bobby and replicate what Bobby did there with the Rams. See what they did as the model there with him. It's not forcing you into your system. Let's run cover 2 and have Bobby going 30 yards straight up through between the 2 seams. It's not that. What you want to do is put him around the line of scrimmage. Let him be that play record down here. Let him blitz. Bobby had the most sacks in his career last year with the Rams. I think that's a pretty eye-opening statistic. This long into his career, he's had the most sacks. Why? Because the Rams blitzed him. Why? Because that's a really big, good part of his game. Use it. So, and the nice part about this, Dan, is you don't have to stretch too hard or be too imaginative if you're the Seahawks in this respect of things, because the Rams run the very same defense you do.
Yeah.
Very same defense you do. So it's just an easy translation now to try to me, put Bobby in that position, and hopefully they do.
Now, one other change that we're hearing about, Miles Adams talked about it pretty extensively yesterday after practice, is change in technique up front. And if you could just speak to that a little bit and how much you're looking forward to seeing that maybe as early as Friday in the mock game, that the former technique, and I'm not as adept a X and O guy as you are, but Al Woods even spoke about it in Jets camp a couple weeks ago. It was one of the reasons he moved on, because he got bored in that system of mirroring, right? And basically occupying blockers as opposed to attacking. Well, now it sounds like they're going more to that. And that's the reason for, and fans still wring their hands over this, we don't have enough big guys. We need some 330 pounders. Well, it sounds like the new technique up there is to penetrate more, shoot gaps, right? Is that something that you're looking forward to seeing?
Well, I think technically, yes, I am looking forward to seeing it. I think even what Al Woods is talking about last year is this is tough. What we're doing is we're modernizing our approach on the defensive line, but it's not an easy one for defensive linemen. For years, you two gapped, which on the defensive line, for the most part, if it's going to be especially an early rundown, if you're attacking in the pass rush, they'd get upfield at those points. At 3rd and 7, we know we can get upfield. We don't have to two gap it. But if it's an early down, I'm going to two gap. And that was what Seattle largely ran for years. You transition to the 3-4, and this, it's called gap and a half is the technique and the term for it. But you transitioned last year with that, but we didn't turn over any of our personnel, right, Dan? I mean, you still had 4-3 personnel in here. Quentin Jefferson's played most 4-3, Poona Ford 4-3, Al Woods 4-3. So you had guys that were used to two gapping who you're now having to tell, okay, we're not two gapping anymore. And they go, okay, I got it. So I'm single gapping? Not really. Yeah, and it's such a tough, touchy little defense, because you technically want to shoot a gap, but you also have to always know where your exit doors are, because you've got to still have a way of getting back to the backside gap. And so there's a real feel to it, which can lead you in a feeling as a defensive lineman of feeling like you're playing the two gap without it being a lot of fun, because you're actually having to still get up the field technically to a spot while still kind of two gapping. And I think it's a bear on defensive linemen, but it's also what can make defensive lines and defenses really tough to play. When you have a lineman now able to cover that area, he's not just sitting down like you could, if you got a guy get everybody two gapping on the line, you can kind of coordinate around that offensive wise to then attack holes from that two gapping perspective, especially to the outside runs, if you can kind of get things pinned on the blocks. So it's a touchy, tough defense to deal with, but it's going to take time to learn this, I think, for a lot of guys. And your 4-3 guys weren't probably well acclimated, to really do that. He is going to that wide 9 technique is now Al Woods with Robert Saleh there. And the wide 9 is different than your typical 4-3. And then it actually lets the defensive lineman get up the football field. Whereas our old 4-3 defense was more about hunkering down, creating that wall, everybody, mans their gap. But it's also the gap and out thing can mess you up too, because if guys don't get to their backside gap, if they're all just about getting to that one first gap side, that's where those cut back holes that we saw that they got gashed in time and time again last year. That's why you hear them, like Miles did, referenced over and over again, gap integrity, because that's the gap integrity where the player goes to the coach and he says, yeah, I shot the gap. I couldn't get quite back to the other thing. Well, you've always got to, where's that exit door? Make sure you can get back to the other side, because if that back reads and goes in, we don't have anybody there. Everybody's got even down to the cornerbacks and the safeties, everyone's got a gap responsibility on the play. This is your gap, that's your gap, that's your gap. So nobody can freelance over to help you if you miss out on yours. Everyone's got it's like the Belichick, do your job. Your job is this gap responsibility and get it done. So it's tough, man. I feel for these guys, because this is the hardest defensive lineman technique to play, in my opinion. I'd much rather be a single gap or two gap guy, because then I know what I got to do. I'm single gapping. I'm getting upfield through this gap. That's what you got me doing. Two gapping. I'm holding my point.
So we've talked a lot about the front seven. Let's finish with the backside, because this has probably been the most overriding subject of training camp so far, and maybe even all the way through OTAs, is now that all the bodies are there, and Tariq Woolen isn't even there. He's not even on the field yet, but how much talent they've stacked up in that secondary, and how good it seems to be performing through the early part of training camp, that even, the last couple of days, Trey Brown has really been a guy that's been the star of the show and getting a lot of ink in how he looked with the extra reps he's getting with Reek out, still nursing that knee injury. Now that Devin Witherspoon's back, and Michael Jackson being the star of camp so far. I don't even have a question here. I just want you to talk about your thoughts on the secondary.
I love to see it. I do have a question for you on this in a second, because I think it's one of the hot items out there in the Seahawks fandom in regards to this as an offshoot a little bit. But I love to see their approach to this. I've always been an inside-outside guy when it comes to defense. That's the old approach. You build from inside to the outside, defensive line, linebackers, to then you get back to your back end. New age analytics says, nope, you need to be building back to front. And so the Seahawks seem to be leaning into what is supposed to be the new evolution of thinking when it comes to how you build defenses. They've leaned into this with the money they've spent in the secondary and now building up these corners as they have. Of course, Coach Carroll is the cornerback whisperer. This is one of the things that's always been a hallmark, I think, of him throughout the years. He knows how to teach cornerback play. So bringing these guys along is not surprising to me. I thought Trey Brown, he's gotten lost a little bit, but you take away Tariq Woolen, you take away Richard Sherman. I think Trey Brown had as impressive a rookie year as any cornerback that we've had here in 10 years in his rookie season. I thought he was outstanding that first year, and the injury sucked. And it seems like it took him an extra year to kind of get over it, but it's understandable now, given that time that he comes back and bounces back. He can stack guys receiver wise. You can't get on top of him. He just has this weird thing where he can always, when he's at his 100, it showed up in that first year, he's always staying in front. Like, you just can't, I'm faster than this guy, but I just can't get up around him. So it's good. Maybe there's a trade potential option here for us, Dan, if we get too big of a stack on this, on that. Michael Jackson's ascent is wonderful to see. He's moving into his prime. It's not surprising a guy just getting into his prime, who's now fully kind of had a couple years in the system, is getting better and is improving. And the question I'd have for you a little bit, and this is the one that's definitely presented to me a lot in my chat, which is the Devin Witherspoon pick being almost a failure now if he's kicked to the inside into the slot.
Yeah, no, I hear it too.
Yeah, and it's one that I really kind of rebel against as far as the thought process goes, because there's a couple things at play. Number one, it sort of is throwing shade at Mike Jackson for that he can't have improved. It doesn't also take into account Witherspoon is a rookie, and you're not going to play like you play 2 years down the line in your rookie year. No player does. That's just understandable. But number three, it's also drafting Witherspoon for me was a symptom of leaning, like you talked about, the change of philosophy in the draft towards value and not need. That's what you let carry the day. You didn't go into that draft of the 5th pick and say, our cornerback room's fine. You know what we really need? You didn't do that. You said, who's the number one guy on my board? And you said, get that guy. And that's how I want my team to draft. That's
Absolutely.
Exactly how I want my team to draft.
Yep.
So but where do you stand on it as far as you're concerned or worried with that?
I want the best players on the field that can help us win at any time. And I think the thing I get it though, there is a perceived value of a guy playing slot. And we saw it right here with Kobe Bryant. He was drafted to be an outside corner. He played nothing but outside at Cincinnati. And when he was moved inside, it was almost seen as, well, he wasn't good enough to make it outside. So we're going to cover him up by moving inside. Justin Coleman's another example of that. And he excelled once they moved him inside, but he was an outside corner when he came into the league. I look at it this way. I don't see it as an indictment on him at all. I think it speaks to obviously Michael Jackson and how well he's played. And also just getting the best players on the field at the same time. And also, what do we know about Devin Witherspoon? His ability to play the run, his ability to attack, and his ability in short area quickness to cover. Some of the best receivers in this league, the most dangerous receivers in this league, and some of these modern offensive schemes are playing guys in the slot. I mean, if Cooper Kupp plays so much out of the slot, you want Mike Jackson on Cooper Kupp, or do you want Devin Witherspoon taking on guys like that? Look what we're going to do. And teams having to match up with what Jackson Smith and Jigba offers out of the slot. And Tyler Lockett sometimes when he moves in there. So I have absolutely no problem. Is he, I think what fans are scared of is he going to be a slot receiver for 10 years? And that's not the case at all. And Pete's even said he's going to be the long-term left corner with hopefully Tariq Woolen for years and years and years on a second contract. It's just a way for now to get the best players on the field at the same time, and I'm in favor of it. So yeah,
I agree indubitably. I also think too he does his best stuff in man coverage, which when you run your typical zone, even our old cover 3, if you ran cover 3 out of 3 wide receiver or nickel, you're going to run the cover 3 of the corners on the outside, but your slot guy is oftentimes going to be in man. And one thing Witherspoon talked about when he was drafted, what do you need to work on? Well, I need to work on my zone coverage. This is where we come back to, you put him in the best position to succeed his first year, everything you just said. And, you're also leaning him away from a little bit of the thing that he needs to grow on, where he can lean into his strength early on, which is, not the worst thing. I come back to the final thing on that I come back to, man, is 93% of the snaps was played by your outside corners last year, the defensive snaps. Your slot played 71%. So we're really wringing our hands over about 22% of snaps given on a season at that point, because impact is impact. You're on the field defensively, just because you're not on the outside corner doesn't mean that slot, like you said, isn't getting more important with the Cooper Kupps and the Amon St. Browns and just moving even number 1 wide receivers into the slot, as many teams do now, to create touches for them like they do. So it's become way more valuable than it used to.
Man, good stuff, Brandon. We covered a lot. We could have covered a lot more. There's some things we didn't even get into, particularly on offense, but we'll save that for another day. Appreciate you coming on the show. Let people know what you got coming up on the Hawks Nest.
We're going to be rolling here on the Hawks Nest. Do 2 shows a week. So Wednesdays and Sundays, 5:00 Pacific Standard Time. We're going to be also expanding that on the regular year. I'm going to be doing like a fantasy stream on Saturday of the season got a new sponsorship with that. So with Underdog Fantasy, going to be running with that during the year. But other than that, just doing, as you see, got Seahawks Nest on Twitter and Hawks Nest on YouTube. You can find me over there, but we be doing a lot of live streams this year. That's for sure.
Did a 6.5 hour live stream just the other day. So if you haven't checked out Brandon's show, that's the kind of stuff you can expect from him. Thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate you coming on.
Appreciate you having me in here, Dan. It was had a great time chopping up with you, man. Love to do it again.
All right. We'll do it again soon.
All right.
That's going to do it for today. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Like this video and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to join me in a couple of days. Corbin Smith of All Seahawks and the Locked On Seahawks podcast will be joining me in person. He's here covering training camp. They have a day off on Wednesday. He's joining me in studio. I'll get his thoughts, first-person accounts of what he's seeing from the field at VMAC with these Seahawks. Until then, forever and always, go Hawks.